Hey, FlimsyLunchTray here, and welcome to our Saturday edition video. We'll be doing an upgrade and commander build video on the Tier 8 American battleship, the Kansas. So first, we're going to start off discussing what type of battleship are we dealing with. Are we dealing with a brawling battleship, more of a mid-range battleship, or a long-range battleship? Kansas fits in my personal opinion, more the mid-range. So let's say the 15 kilometer, 13, maybe even up to 12, but that 15 to 12 kilometer range. And she can even sit further back and perform, more of those 18 kilometer, 20 kilometer shots easily, depending on if you catch players off guard at range. She's not built for close range combat just because of how squishy she is, and that she eats a lot of HE spam and a lot of AP penetration in the overmatch when you get up to tier 8 and you start facing other tier 8s, 9s, and 10s. Okay, so when we're looking at the armor, the thing about that makes Kansas such a squishy battleship is that she's coated with this 32 millimeter plating. I mean, it's just everywhere. I mean, you don't even have a 32 millimeter like armor belt, anything like that, right? And then 19 millimeter on the superstructure. The turrets, 2 and 30 on the side, 127 on the top, 457 millimeter in the front. So that is good. So, and then we look at the back of the turret, 230. So basically sides all in the back, 230, front's 457. So top of the turret is definitely most vulnerable in terms of the armor scheme. Now, when we're checking out the Kansas, she has a really good torpedo protection that basically wraps around the entire ship. Like, it's all of this. So you've missed that torpedo protection on the very aft end or the bow fore-end plating of the ship. So if we take that away, then you can see ship becomes a lot more skinnier. Okay, so we're going to take away some more other armor and show you where that citadel is. Now, citadel is actually beneath waterline, just barely. So that helps for sure, being able to avoid that damage, significant damage. But of course, if you're at range long enough, then it's likely that someone who has that overmatch can just punch through and citadel you. But you are at least not super vulnerable in the sense that your citadel is above the waterline. So that works out for us well here with Kansas. Now, when we're looking at the modules and the upgrades here on Kansas, first let's talk about these 406 millimeter guns. Right now, how it's set up, because we don't have access to 6 slot to make that reload time any shorter. It's a 40-second reload time. I don't have anything in terms of turret traverse. We're going to talk about that or grease the gears to make that stock 45 degree, 180 degree turn time, right? That's pretty long. Decent HE shell damage, decent AP damage. I mean, she has a very heavy AP broadside because of these 12 406 millimeter guns. In terms of her hull, your survivability, your AA defense, and your maneuverability is all going to go up. You're going to go from 61,300 hit points to 67,000, and also you're helping more bolster that AA defense that Kansas has. So when you're facing those tier 6, tier 8 CVs, especially tier 6 CVs, you just shoot them out of the sky, also due to your defensive AA fire consumable. And then that maneuverability bonus, so 15.7 second rudder shift time and a 700 meter turning circle radius. So like in comparison to North Carolina, it's smaller. Massachusetts is very close to Massachusetts if you want to if you have Massachusetts and you're wondering, but it's really close. The gun range stock, you're at 20.6, but then once you mount the upgraded gunfire control system, you're at 22.7. So that is rather nice. And then your speed is nothing you can do to enhance your propulsion. You're at 23 knots. But if we come over into the signals, we can throw a CRM mic flag on, increase ship speed by plus 5%, and now we're up to 24.2 knots. And I'm going to talk about how we can even increase this further when we're looking at the commander here shortly. In terms of upgrades, I would recommend taking the main armaments modification 1. This reduces the risk of your main battery becoming incapacitated by -20%, main battery survivability plus 50%, main battery repair time -20%. Just because so much of the ship revolves around its guns. It's very tough armor on the front of those turrets, but that side, and especially the top armor, is really weak, and you can have your guns knocked out into Kansas. The auxiliary armaments, really this is a survivability for your AA and your secondaries. I don't recommend this because you're not a secondary battleship. You'd be more the AA, and that's if you have a carrier in game. Then you'd be getting not much benefits out of this. You also have magazine modification. It reduces the risk of your ship's magazine detonating by -70%. But if you've been around here long enough, you know I'm just going to recommend the Juliet Charlie combat signal, which completely eliminates the risk of your ship's magazine detonating. So run this in randoms, clan battles. Well, I don't think anyone really takes Kansas in clan battles. But in ranked, that's where you want to be running the Juliet Charlie combat signal. Now it's for co-op. And I don't recommend either of these two looking at those. So moving on swiftly. Upgrade 2, the slot 2, we take the damage control system modification. This reduces our risk of catching fire and the risk of flooding, -5% for fire, -3% for flooding. Because you're the squishy battleship that's susceptible to HE spam quite easily, anything we can do to help lower the chances of catching on fire is important in maintaining that survivability with Kansas. You also have engine room protection. This is something you see more often on cruisers and destroyers. Not really neat, I would say, in taking it on Kansas. You also get access to the defensive AA fire consumable. This would simply increase your action time and reduce the reload time. Again, if you're going to go for an all-out AA build, then, you know, Kansas probably isn't the ship you'd want to be doing that with. You do something like the Rochester at tier 8 has a really good AA that we could increase even further. But not so much here with the battleship. So really, the damage control system modification 1 is what you want. Now, I've left this slot empty for the moment. And that is because there's a few options here. In yesterday's video, I had the artillery plotting room modification 1, and I think that's just because I already had this available. I didn't spend credits for it. This increases our main bounty firing range by plus 16%. So then we were looking at over 26 kilometers, but I don't think Kansas does superbly well if you're playing that far away from the enemy team, especially since you have access to the spotting aircraft, which extends your main bounty firing range by plus 20%, because ideally you want to be playing within that 22 kilometer range, and I think closer to that 16-15 is where Kansas really begins to shine and landing more accurate salvos. So I did run that yesterday's video. Probably what I'm going to recommend you taking is the main battery modification 2, because that 180 degree turn time is 45 seconds. So it's quite brutal in that sense. So we mount that. Now it brings us down to 39.1 seconds. It's better. It's not the best by any means, but it's better at this point in time. Again, this isn't a secondary battleship. If you're doing an AA build type ship, I think you can do a cruiser. American cruiser would be better overall. Heck, you could even pick up the USS Kidd, really good AA at tier 8 for a destroyer. For slot 4, I'm going to recommend taking the damage control system modification 2. This reduces your fire extinguishing time by -15% and flooding recovery time -15%. So because you're a squishy battleship, this is something we want to kind of help here out on Kansas, especially as you're ascending into the high tiers here, and it's likely you're going to be bottom tiered rather frequently and facing those tier 9, tier 10 ships that it can be a lot more HE spam. So reducing that fire time is really helpful. So this is what I'm going to recommend for sure here. What's nice now with the enhanced propulsion with the buff that they just did on the Kansas, this really, I mean, you could increase your propulsion furthermore. I don't think I'd recommend that so much because you're not always going to be able to dodge everything because you are this kind of larger, short, fat American battleship. So you already have that propulsion built in now, so then this is even nicer. And I really wouldn't recommend the steering gears. Your turning circle radius is already really good. Of course, you could make it shine even more, but I think it's fine. And then you can't always guarantee you're going to run into submarines, so no point in taking this. So damage control system modification 2. For slot 5, you have torpedo lookout system. This is assured acquisition range of torpedoes. This is something that tends to work well in tangent with hydroacoustic search, so maybe more on your German battleships. But what I would recommend for sure is the concealment system modification. This reduces your ship's detectability range by sea, negative 10%. Squadron detectability range, negative 10%. Dispersion of shells fired by enemies attacking your ship, plus 5%. So it's not just about the concealment, but also enemies have a harder time maybe landing shots on your ship. Slight nerf to their dispersion, if you will. So really that. The ship consumables modification, this would increase your action time of your consumables by plus 10%. But again, that concealment is really nice because right now, I don't have concealment expert on the commander, but it's 14.5 and we can get that down even further. Don't need to talk about the armament consumables. You have a 20-second action time on your damage control party. Reload time of 80 seconds. That's pretty standard on the tier 8 battleships. With the new buff that Wargaming did on the repair party is our reload time is 40 seconds instead of that standard 80 seconds. And that really led to the ships being focused down and killed off rather quickly, just because they're so squishy and they eat a lot of damage. So that 40-second reload time is really nice. Now when we're looking at the health pull per second, 335, if I mount the India Delta combat signal, you're going to see that that's going to go up to 402. So if you're running randoms, ranked clan battles, you want to be taking that combat signal. This really helps here. The action time right now is 28 seconds, but we can get that over 30 with a commander skill I'm going to recommend. You have two options. You have the spotting aircraft and the fighter. I find the AA currently on Kansas is pretty good on its own, and a fighter never stops the first strike. So the spotting aircraft in my mind comes in a lot more handy because you are this more mid-range to long-range battleship with these 12, 4, and 6mm guns. So making this shine a little bit more. Maybe you're trying to catch a cruiser that's just behind an island and you just need a better visual. It's really helpful. And then last but not least, you have the defensive AA fire consumable. So if you saw yesterday's video when we had that tier 6 Ryujo flew in on us, he didn't even get his first strike off. Just because he was, I think, a little bad at avoiding the flak explosions. But it was just really good, and you can chew down tier 6 CVs quite well. Tier 8s, it's a little bit more of a struggle, challenge. You'll hold your own, but you'll never stop the first strike unless that carrier player manages to fly all into your shell explosions. Okay, so let's go ahead and hop in and look at the commander. Now, I originally had a different commander here on the Kansas, but since then I've moved him to the Vermont. I'm still trying to figure out how I'm rearranging some of my commanders because I'm going to be showing you the Minnesota and the Vermont at some point in the near future. Now, there's a few different ways. There's two main lines I could think of, or maybe there's even three that you can do with the Kansas. And I've actually redistributed the skills because something I mentioned in yesterday's video, and you only have so many points available depending on what you want to do. So because you have such a long reload time on the Kansas, the gun feeder skill doesn't really make any sense here. That would just mean you're going from a 40 second, if you're switching when your gun's already loaded, you go from 40 seconds to 20 seconds. And that's still a really long time, so you might as well just go ahead and take your shot. So I'm not going to recommend taking gun feeder. The two skills you could look at as your first pointers would either be the emergency repair specialist. The reload time of the damage control party consumable and the repair party consumable reload time are reduced by -3%. And then you also have preventative maintenance. This just helps keep those main turrets in line and also reduces any risk of your steering gears or your engine becoming incapacitated. right now we're going to hang on to the emergency repair specialist as our first point. Now, this is where things are going to vary, and I'll probably circle back and talk about more of other options, okay? So our maneuverability. Right now we are 24.2 knots, and you have this skill called Brisk. It's a can-be activated skill and increases your ship's speed while she remains undetected. Ship speed plus 10%. Now, watch as the maximum speed goes up from 24.2, and I guess I have to master it for it to kick in. But you would be going up by 10%, so then 2.42, so then you're looking at over 26 knots, and that is actually much more speed, but 26.4 knots, something like that. I'm going to master it here in a minute, but this was going to help you much more overall. So we're going to stay with this for just the moment. And then you have Adrenaline Rush. This would, it enhances the ship parameters for each 1% of HP loss. So this, I was running yesterday's video, so, instead of having a 40-second reload time, we were down to, I think, around 37 seconds, and we were like half health. So that is much better to have. So I definitely recommend the Adrenaline Rush just because it helps with that really long reload time. And I just realized this skill isn't showing up because it's a can-be activated skill, so it's not going to buff that up. Yeah, and then what I'd recommend is next is picking up the fire prevention. This reduces the risk of your ship catching fire. The maximum number of fires on a ship is reduced to 3. So risk of catching fire, negative 10%. Maximum number of fires, -1. So what fire prevention does is normally you'd have 4 fires on your battleship, or your ship in general, 1 on the bow, 1 on the stern, and 1 on the rear part of the superstructure, and 1 on the forward part of the superstructure. Fire prevention takes these 2 fires and makes it only 1. And a lot of people are going to be focusing on the superstructure area because you're pretty wide here. So having fire prevention is really huge, and it mitigates how much damage you're going to be taking. So you definitely want to pick that up on top of having that negative 10% chance of catching fire. Okay. So let me do the mathematics on this Brisk skill real quick, because I do not want to tell you wrong, and I can even talk about the skill a tiny bit more. Oh, go back. So yeah, it's 26.62 knots. So what Brisk does really well is when you fire all 4 turrets on your Kansas, you have a 40-second reload time where you're just waiting to be able to shoot again. So being able to simply, sorry, I'm getting a phone call. But being able to, 20 seconds, you're undetected if there's no one else close to you. And then all of a sudden, you're 20 seconds where you can reach that full speed. Or if you have wiped out the enemy team on your flank, or you need to go dark and run, getting up to that 26.6 knots is really handy. So that's where Brisk really begins to shine here. Okay. And then I'm going to recommend the rest of a standard battleship build. Okay. So then next, it's up to you. You could go for concealment. This is going to get you down to 13 kilometers by sea, 10.9 by air. This is really good. This would be a 14-point build. So your concealment definitely gets a buff there. And then picking up the emergency repair specialist, because now you have that 40-second cooldown time on your repair party, and it gives you an additional heal, and extends the action time of your damage control party and also your repair party by plus 10%. So then it's over a 30-second action time on your repair party. This is really good and helps you get more health back. So this is a definite for sure. And then I would recommend taking the basics of survivability. If your module gets knocked out, the restoration time would be negative 15%, the fire extinguishing time, negative 15%, the flooding recovery time, negative 15%. So this, all in all, is a really good build. What normally would be a more standard battleship build you would see here would be something like this. This means taking without Brisk. So if you're fine and not taking Brisk, you don't want to, This helps you get that 180-degree turn time on the turrets down to 32.6 seconds. And if you put a George Doe or John Doe commander, Halsey as an example, they have an enhanced grease the gears, then you're looking closer to the 30 seconds. So they can work out well here, but granted, they have the gun feeder enhanced skill, and that's a skill you're just not really taking on the Kansas because it's such a long reload time. But you'd be getting it down to 10 seconds if you decided to have that type of commander here. So this is what you could do. Now, another thing could be is, what if you want to have grease the gears and brisk? Well, then I would say probably drop basics of survivability, and you pick up brisk, and then you have another point free, and you could go for something like this. These, in my mind, are the three types of main builds I would recommend with the Kansas. If you're asking what my number one thought is, I'm thinking of going for this as my main. With the turret time being 39.1 seconds, yeah, it's not great. And normally with this type of battleship, since you're playing more at the mid-range, you're not like in these brawling situations where your turret time, 180-degree turn time, is that important, right? Maybe you're playing that 15, 16 kilometers away. Maybe you're sitting in kiting position, a more forward position. So it doesn't hurt that much, okay? So I would probably be torn between doing this or this, honestly. This would probably be the first two I would recommend. But there's nothing wrong if you just wanted to go for the standard battleship build here on the Kansas. I've watched some other people get their thoughts, community contributors, non-community contributors, and when they run brisk, it's just like they can't go without it after they've ran it because of how much it helps with the maneuverability on the ship when you're dark, and then you're able to go now over 26 knots, where originally we started off at 23 knots, and that is really painful at tier 8 because if you're not running the brisk, and I think even still with the Sierra Mike flag, you're still the slowest stock American stock battleship. I don't know how to say that. You're the slowest tier 8 battleship in the game. So if we can just buff that up a little bit more, that's actually rather nice. So if you're wondering what I'm going to do for now, I'm probably just going to master this for the time being. I can test out brisk a little bit, and then if I decide, that turret time is really killing me, I might go something like this, but my intentions right now are to run with a build like this. So I hope you have appreciated this video. Kind of surprised we're actually able to do that in underneath 24 minutes at the point in time. So if you didn't check out the Kansas battle I had yesterday, make sure to check out the video I'll have clipped here at the end where you can go see Kansas in action. The buffed Kansas is much better than the previous Kansas, as it was such a pain. I hated playing it, and now it's actually not too bad. That's more of an enjoyable experience in playing the Kansas compared to when it first came into the game. So if you liked today's video, give it a thumbs up. If you did not, give it a thumbs down. Subscribe if you do want to see more. If you're subscribed, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And we'll catch you here next time. Take care.